time. We got a clip here from our friends over at the Recount. I love what they do over there. They do great summaries. Here's a clip of all the hypocritical people. I don't have to cuss there. I do want to cuss when I see people who absolutely would have been happy that King was assassinated if they were living at that time, now use and co-opt his language as a way of not only attacking voting rights, but also attacking Black Lives Matter. David, run that clip from the Recount.
Lives Matter is a Marxist organization.
This is a violent group, radical mob.
Radicalized identity politics that rejects Martin Luther King's dream.
Republicans have repeatedly invoked Dr. King's name, suggesting he would not approve of these protests.
Martin Luther King was not about violence.
Because Martin Luther King
would be horrifying.
Yes, Dr. King was deeply committed to the principle and practice of nonviolent protest, but it's revisionist history to cast him as a leader who would be ideologically opposed to today's Black Lives Matter protests. His rhetoric in 1963 is still strikingly relevant.
We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied.
Americans today view Dr. King as a hero with overwhelming 90% favorability. But during his fight for civil rights, Dr. King's approval rating was lower than President Trump's now. Today he's remembered for nonviolence. Back then, his movement was painted by opponents of civil rights as inherently violent. His rhetoric characterized as an invitation to violence. One Republican congressman accused King of promoting anarchy among his followers. He was branded an extreme, dangerous demagogue. They called him communist, radical. For his beliefs, he was beaten, surveilled by the FBI, and assassinated by a white supremacist. Fast forward to today, and despite the fact that Black Lives Matter is a predominantly peaceful movement, Republicans have once again sought to discredit the fight for justice as purely violent. And then have the audacity, like Republican Ken Cuccinelli, to lecture today's protesters, imploring them to be more like Dr. King.
They can state their grievances or their positions peacefully. That's the Dr. Martin Luther King model that we're hoping for in Washington.
If you're going to define Black Lives Matter as
radical, violent,
Marxist, at least recognize that it is the same old story we've been told before.
When he said sometime, this is the time.
This is the time.
This is the time that Dr. Mack was talking
It's time for Black Jesus to come on the scene and whip these people out of their temples, man. These people have lost their minds because not a single one of them. I just keep Dr. King's name out your mouth, number one. But number two, they understand that they've been whitewashing people since Jesus. Dr. King's nothing to them. They could whitewash Dr. King in 30, 40, 50 years. They whitewashed Jesus 2,000 years. So what's this? And this is exactly what they do.
But you see,
Ben, to this point, you know, one of the most salient points about this video was they said, look, back in his time, Dr. King had a public approval rating below that of -45. See, this is how much he was hated. So no matter what we did, they're going to cast it like that. So today, you got a national holiday after a man who in his lifetime was a hated and despised man. And remember this, family, he who defines rules. So that is nothing more than a definition today of Black Lives Matter, the same type of definition that they put on King because we were making progress. Today, if I evoke the name the greatest, everybody reckons back to Ali. Ali was one of the most hated, despised men in this country. Colin Kaepernick, it won't be long before the San Francisco 49ers erect a statue of Colin Kaepernick kneeling outside of their stadium. Trust and believe that.
After disrespect.
Right.
Now, Black Lives Matter. One of the most progressive movements in our lifetime that has brought about recognition to police reform and is well on the way of getting folks held accountable. That's why when we look at the verdict that was given down in the George Floyd case or the Arbery case, we can look at that as the results of Black Lives Matter. And so what are they going to do? They are going to now try to paint them as anarchists, as violent. Who is America to ever talk about anything having to do with violence? America was founded on violence. Anytime America doesn't get her way, she gets to crying and she pulls out any weapon she wants to. And when we talk about violence, don't ever forget this, family, that one of the most horrific acts in the history of humanity was committed by this country when we dropped 2 nuclear bombs. Never in the history of mankind has anybody ever acted so violent. So America, how dare you try to lecture us about the issue of violence.
Amen.
Let me say this. Boom with that forehead, with that 2x4.
Not all the time, but sometimes.
Every now and
right
then.
now is one of them times.
Hello. I feel that because that's how I was feeling all through my timeline yesterday. Because I was like, see, y'all gonna start early on MLK Day. Try to make it before the black folks is up, but we up, right? They try to get these little
Press
quotes
out,
in, but they haven't yet. Press releases. I'm heading to Atlanta today, and because we know what Martin Luther King did, so I'm gonna head to Atlanta and I'm going to march, and that for me is me being a part of the history, me remembering him. But here's the thing: they won't quote things like, I'm tired of marching for something that should have been mine at birth. They're not going to quote that. Amen.
They're not
going to quote whites. It must frankly be said are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. They're not going to quote that. Amen. Okay, there's a woman that goes by Ida B. Wells, and I don't know her real name, but she's well known in the political world too, where they have, she's a stand-up activist, right? And I follow her on Twitter, and she was talking about how she was called to do a speech, right, for to commemorate Martin Luther King. Yeah. And her name is Ida B. Wells, and she said that when she went up there to do this, when she was going to do the speech, there was emails that were sent back to her saying, "Hey, I don't like the way that you're doing the speech. I think that this is not what Martin Luther King
you're talking about Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Yeah, well, I don't. Her name is Ida B. Wells, and she's very popular on Twitter. But I read her thread, and her thread talked about when she went to go do the speech. They were saying that they didn't want her to do it because they read it and it was saying things, right? Like it was like, oh no, it's a little too radical, right? The way they wanted to teach us when we were younger and in high school, elementary, grade school, the way that they whitewashed him for us. And so she went back, revised it, but took quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King himself, put them all together, and started the speech that way. It shook them folks in the room like nobody's business, right? They thought those were her own words, and what the words were saying were exactly what I was quoting here.
That's right.
And a few more. And within those, the audience was shook, but she had to tell them, those aren't my words, those are the words of Martin Luther King. And this is what people need to start doing, because this is what we have come to the point to start doing and saying, you're not going to keep quoting this man, knowing that what he said after that is more meaningful than that one little line. That's his dream right there. But he's telling you guys what you're doing now and why we can't get to that dream. Why that cannot be a thing that we live in, because you guys don't want to hold yourselves accountable. You guys being the people who are, white supremacists or people who align with them, because it ain't only white folks. As everybody say, what they say, all skin folk ain't what?
Kinfolk.
And Sister Queen, let me say this. When they want to go back to that one line in 1963, talking about, we look forward to the day when we can judge a person on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Take them back to when President Obama was elected. The day he was elected, he was judged on the color of his skin. Nobody knew the content of his character. He was judged on the color of his skin. Now, speaking of speeches, I want to give you just a glimpse from Frances Ellen Harper. So in 1893, her and 6 other sisters went to the World Congress of Representatives of Women in Chicago, because they felt like the plight of Black women was being ignored. And this is what this sister said in her speech. We are bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on this weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving a curse in its own soul. You tried that in your case of the Negro. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. Where there exists this brutal element in society which tramples upon the feeble and treads down on the weak, I tell you that if there is any class of people who need to be lifted out of their airy nothingness and selfishness, it is the white women of America.
God,
wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
In other words,
who said that?
It's the Karens.